Um, we want to acknowledge the land that we're joining from. So I am joining today from Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples and the national homeland of the Red River Métis in what is now known as Winnipeg. And all of us live in communities that exist on land taken from Indigenous peoples across the country, across Turtle Island. And acknowledging that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples are the first stewards of the land is a first step to acknowledging that. So we invite you to learn more at forourkids.ca/decolonization, and we'll share that link in the chat. And if you know the name of the Indigenous nation or nations whose land you're calling from today, please feel free to share that. There's also native-land.ca is a great resource to find out more about this. Great. So before we get into the discussion, I want to quickly say a little bit about For Our Kids. I think a lot of you are familiar, but if you're not, we're a Canadian nonprofit organization who started in 2019, and our vision is really harnessing the powerful, visceral love that parents have for their kids and their instinct to protect them. And we use that to build a constituency of parents to demand more action on climate change. So we're really about supporting parents where they're at and building their capacity to take something on. So we believe that you don't need to be an expert to take meaningful action, and that your love for your kids is a superpower. And if you're not familiar with For Kids and have more questions, we'd be happy to chat at the end of the call, or feel free to put your questions in the chat. Great, so now to the main event. Today we have a discussion with two amazing organizers from America and from the UK. So Liat Olenick is joining us today. Liat is an organizer, activist, and early childhood educator based in Brooklyn. In 2017, she co-founded a local civic organization, Indivisible Brooklyn. And in 2021, she helped co-found the current iteration of Climate Families New York City and has helped steer the organization's City Bank campaign, federal actions, communications, and organizational growth. And if you're not familiar, Climate Families New York City is a grassroots, mostly volunteer, New York City-based group of kids and caregivers fighting for an end to fossil fuels and a cleaner, greener future for all. So really excited to have Liat here with us today. And our other speaker is Maya Mailer. So Maya is the co-director of Our Kids Climate, a global network catalyzing and supporting parent-led and intergenerational climate organizing in 55 countries. She is also the co-founder of the UK group Mothers Rise Up, which is running some of the most creative fossil fuel finance campaigns in the climate space. So Mothers Rise Up works in partnership with parent groups in the UK and across the globe to fight for the right of all children to grow up in a safe climate and to breathe clean air. They bring together parent power with bold and creative actions to pressure governments and corporations to act. So we're mostly going to be having a conversation today, but before we say hello to our speakers, I just want to show you a few action photos from what they've done. So this is Mothers Rise Up work and some great in-person, really creative actions here. This is a cake. This is an advent calendar. So some other kind of inspiring action ideas here as well. And then this is Climate Families New York City. So I think this is in maybe governor's office, on the streets, targeting executive at Citibank. So lots of really great inclusive family actions happening here as well. So I will take down the slides here, and I think you should be able to see the three of us now. Perfect. Okay. So thank you so much, Maya and Liat, for joining us. It's great to see you. And maybe I'll start briefly by maybe I'll start with you, Maya. Could you tell us a little bit about how your group came to be? How did you get started? What's your origin story?
Thanks, Gabrielle. It's so lovely to be here with you all and with Liat as well. So I'm Maya and I'm calling in from London. I've got 3 kids, one of whom some of you saw at the start of this call. So they're age 6 and then almost 11 and 13. And gosh, the birth story of Mothers Rise Up. So my background is working on human rights and refugee issues with big NGOs, with Oxfam and with refugee charities here in the UK. And I was obviously aware of climate change and I saw climate impacts. I spent a lot of time living in East Africa, but it did feel quite distant. It didn't feel like the most pressing issue compared with some of the human rights abuses that I was seeing. And I guess I didn't really even fully understand the gravity of the problems or like degrees of warming. It felt quite abstract. And then my kids, the older kids, started coming home from school asking me questions like, is the world gonna heat up and are all the animals gonna become extinct? And at the same time, there was the wave of youth strikes and Extinction Rebellion, and just things started turning over in my mind. And by chance, when I was on maternity leave with Emmy, who's now 6, I got connected with some mothers in my neighborhood. And they had like the seed of this idea called Mothers Rise Up, and they were planning to organize a march in solidarity with the youth strikes. And I was like, yes, let's do this. I'll jump into this with you. So we were like 7 moms on a WhatsApp group, no kind of real infrastructure. And we were like, we are going to organize a march in central London in solidarity with the youth strikes, but we're going to do it in a family-friendly way on the weekend rather than on a Friday. And it's really going to be about showing families and parents that they have a voice and should have a voice. And I always describe it like a teenager party, because we were like, who's going to show up? Will anyone come to this event? Thinking there'd be maybe like a few hundred, and there ended up being 3,000 people, like mainly first-time protesters on the streets of London. And that was way back in 2019, 5 years ago. Anyway, exactly 5 years ago, in May. And so that was really the founding moment of Mothers Rise Up, organizing this big Mothers Climate March in the heart of London. And we tried to do it in a really joyful way with huge push chairs, or I guess you guys call them strollers. You saw them on the photos, and kids and speakers from kind of across different walks of life. We had a comedian, we had like an influencer, we had climate activists, and that was really the beginning. And it kind of grew from there. But at the heart was trying to organize in a really joyful, visual, creative way. And that was the beginning. And then we ended up focusing on Lloyd's of London and insurance companies, but like maybe come to that later. Hand over to Liat.
Yeah, I love that story. Hi, everyone. I'm Liat, and excited to be here with all of you. I'm a teacher. That's my background. I taught in public school in New York for 10 years, and I was a science teacher. And before that, I was an environmental educator, and I worked with kids in pre-K to 4th grade. So I had been doing a lot of work around climate with my students. And then at the same time, you may know there was a big election in the United States in 2016, and I started doing a lot of organizing around democracy work here, and that kind of just led me to organizing and activism. And then, similar to Maya, 2018 was a real turning point for me with the IPCC report and youth strikes and the Sunrise Movement here in the States. And I kind of had, I had become an environmental educator and science teacher because I wanted to teach kids to be stewards of the earth, but I had a realization that the process of teaching small children is far too slow to, counter the massive problem of the climate crisis. So I started organizing with a Sunrise group in New York. And I was already, if you don't know Sunrise, they're youth focused. I was already in my 30s. I was like, I feel like I'm too old for this group, but I really like them. I like their model. And I sort of got connected with a bunch of other moms who are also in their 30s. I hadn't had my kid yet, but who wanted to participate and do a lot of the climate actions, but, just had very different needs because they had babies and toddlers. And I just was like, this is the group for me. I know how to organize events for kids. That's my life's work. And, these are kind of my people. So I started collaborating with this group, and we sort of formed an offshoot that we called Sunrise Kids. And in doing that, we really realized there was like a big hole in the climate movement, at least in America, where there's like this powerful youth presence. And then there's in a lot of the sort of more established climate organizations, there's like a lot of elders and, you know, established professionals and, you know, people who had more time, but there was like a big gap of people with young kids. And we felt like, you know, this is a tremendous organizing opportunity. We need that parent power if we're going to win things as a climate movement. And we also know what parents need to be able to participate. You know, they need actions to be kid friendly. They need actions to be short. They need them to be in the morning, you know, things like that. So we started just putting together actions that were designed to engage both parents and caregivers and kids. And eventually from that became Climate Families NYC, and things really took off because there's a huge demand among, you know, families in New York City looking for an outlet, and there's not as many options for people who can't go to meetings at 7 p.m., you know, every week or things like that. So, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah, definitely that niche that needs to be filled. And so many, we hear that all the time from network, people who really want to be involved, but have all these sort of obligations on their time, and amazing to figure out ways to offer that. Can you tell both of you, tell me a little bit about your overall strategy? Like, so you both worked on, you know, banks and insurers, you're kind of doing some targeted actions. How did you kind of come up with your strategy and what you're sort of focused on? Maybe Liat, do you want to start this time?
Sure. And I should add that I also eventually had a baby who's now a toddler. And I feel like if I had not found Climate Families NYC, I would have not had a child. So like finding the community was really key for me to like step into parenthood. In terms of our strategy, I would say it's always evolving. Especially we've grown a lot in the last 2 years. And as we get bigger, you know, we have more capacity, but also, you know, are making more decisions around strategy. But generally, I think we're guided by like trying to be good partners to the coalitions we're a part of and following the lead of groups that have more, you know, sort of more resources and capacity than us, because we're not a policy organization. We don't have researchers, you know, so we defer to other groups that we work with that have that capacity, honestly. And in terms of our organizing strategy, you know, in terms of picking targets and stuff, if that makes sense. So we have started working with a lot of other groups that were working on finance campaigns. And we saw, oh, there's like a unique role for parents and kids to play here, because we can kind of be the friendly face of this emerging climate finance movement, where maybe people pay attention to us in a different way than they would, you know, the typical radical activists in their 20s or something like that. And then, you know, similarly, we do federally national focus work and local legislative advocacy and organizing, and, you know, realizing just like always looking for the place where it's the most strategic for us to have parents and kids there. And do our kind of very unique brand of like creative direct action. So yeah, I would say we try to fit in where we're most needed and where our identities can have the maximum impact is a big way we think about it.
That makes a lot of sense. What about you, Maya? How does your group think about these questions?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I might speak to both Mothers Rise Up and Our Kids Climate, because I've got this double-hatted role. So I co-founded Mothers Rise Up with UK mums, and then I'm also now co-directing Our Kids Climate, which is like the umbrella network, the big tent. We run a fellowship. Liat is one of the fellows. So there's kind of two strategies there. So for Mothers Rise Up, it's quite similar to New York Climate Families. In that we work in coalition and in collaboration with other networks. And we decided, so for a while, we were doing various creative street actions. We were outside Shell, we were outside BP, we were outside Number 10, and there was like a real creative thread to all of it, but it wasn't necessarily driving towards a specific strategy. And then we got in touch with the Sunrise Project, not to be confused with the Sunrise Movement. And they encouraged us, actually, like it was that there was encouragement for them to focus on Lloyd's of London, which is the biggest insurer of fossil fuels in the world. So they're an insurance marketplace. And that was actually incredibly helpful for us because it gave us a real focus. And within this huge corporate Goliath, we went super focused. We decided to focus on the chair of Lloyd's as a father and as a cricket enthusiast. And that gave us like a huge body of creative work to do around that. So everything from sending him subverted Father's Day cards to unfurling a banner at Lord's Cricket Club, which is this really like prestigious old school cricket ground where he was also chair, is also chair. So we snuck in a banner in a fake baby bump. Don't tell anyone. That was our way in. But it just opened up this whole space to be really creative. There's so many different things that we did. This cricket themed advent calendar. You saw the photo. And then we ended up becoming the first campaign group to land a meeting with the chair. And he said, you've humanized me. You've had this novel approach. That's essentially why I'm meeting with you. Whether that then kind of had impact is like another question that we can dig into. So that's really been our strategy, is to focus in on this big fossil fuel enabler and then do personalized campaigning around it. And it works because we're in coalition. So there's other groups that are taking a harder approach, because we're lovely, the mums, we gift him things and it's all very kind of fun and friendly and attractive. And I think that only works if, there's other people that have more of a stick, more of the Extinction Rebellion types, and other groups like looking at kind of litigation and parliamentary work. So I think having many voices within a coalition is the strategy, and our voice is that kind of for us, mother-led in the UK, mother-led, unifying, joyful voice that can bring more people in and can also demystify and explain something which on the face of it is incredibly dry and boring, like insurance. Most people don't wake up in the morning and think, woo, I'm gonna become an insurance campaigner. But we tried to make it fun. And I think there was a real value to that voice, similar to what Liat described. So that's the UK focused work targeting the insurance companies. And then for Our Kids Climate, which is a global network, and it's obviously much more challenging to find a narrative across so many different countries, where there are so many different strategies. One of the narratives we've really leaned into is the interconnection between children's health, the air they breathe, air pollution, and then, explaining that what drives air pollution is also what drives the climate crisis, and that's the burning of fossil fuels. And the solution to both toxic air and the climate crisis is renewable, clean, safe, renewable energy, among other things. And we found that narrative has really worked in places like Poland, India, Vietnam, where it might be more difficult to talk about climate, but who can argue with protecting children's health? And that has led to collaboration with healthcare professionals, with teachers. And again, the parent voice there is very, very strong as like custodians of their children's health and then of planetary health and how the two intersect. So that's the approach we've taken at the global level, and have brought that to COPs, to the UN climate talks with delegation of mothers. And that work will continue, and there's like real opportunities for the whole, I think, movement globally to support that and to amplify that work.
Amazing. Yeah. It sounds like the really leaning to the parent voice and what you can bring to the table in a coalition is super useful. Just before we move on to the more practical pieces, I guess I'm curious too. You said, there is something dry about some of these fossil finance targets. How do you explain that to your, the people who you're working with, and kind of like sustain that interest among your own participants and volunteers? Like, do you find that is a challenge to sort of translate that? And then also, I think we talked about this yet, but I'm curious about how you explain that to kids too, right? If you're trying to do family friendly events and do kids, you know, resonate with that, or what's your approach to sort of making this something that feels like this is exciting and what we want to be working on?
Oh, should I go first? Okay. Yeah, well, I think I should have said earlier, our main strategy is really organizing and base building. We're a base building group, but that's another thing. In terms of how we explain it, you know, I think you know, we've held some trainings and orientations, but there's also just a lot of narratives around, you know, like who has power and the choices that they have that we use for both talking with kids and adults. So, you know, like talking about, okay, the CEO of Citibank, which is our main finance target, like has all of this power, so much more power than you and me. And like and also like a framing of, we live in New York where all these firms are based. We're so, you know, lucky sort of to be in their backyard and have the opportunity to go right to their doors and pressure them, you know, while the communities that are most impacted by their fossil fuel financing around the world don't have that opportunity. So it's also like a message of that we have an obligation as New Yorkers with this proximity to power to make our voices heard. And then in terms of kids, you know, we literally made a picture book about City CEO. And I think it's, forget what it's A Tale of Two Cities. But it's an illustrated picture book, and it's about her and the choice she has to be a hero or a villain. And we've read it at like multiple actions. The kids love it. They asked to read it again. You know, there's a lot of kids' stories about heroes and villains. So I think it's a framing that children can relate to. I've actually found, you know, kids are very comfortable identifying a bad guy and telling them what to do and, you know, yelling at them or, you know, expressing their opinion. It's often the adults who feel a little bit more uncomfortable with that framing, and need to be, you know, moved along to understand that, oh, actually, if you have a salary of, you know, $100 million a year, thanks to funding fossil fuel expansion, maybe you're not like a nice person. And it's okay if we're protesting them. Yeah, so I found like kids are super into it and understand. You know, we definitely like, we're conscious of the language we use. We're not talking about underwriting or loans with 5-year-olds, but we are talking about, you know, a bank is a place that has a big pot of money, and they make choices of our money, and they make choices about where to spend that money. And we don't want them to spend it on fossil fuels. We want them to spend it on green energy. And I think, you know, since we talk about fossil fuels and green energy with the kids all the time, that is something they understand.
What about you, Maya?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And a lot of the, I think, messaging around fossil fuel financing, insurance, banks can deter people because it can get very technical. So what we've tried to do is really simplify the narrative. And there is a really clear narrative, like without insurance, fossil fuel projects cannot go ahead. So it's just such a short circuit. It's one of the most quickest and powerful routes we have to stop fossil fuel projects from going ahead or from being maintained. And we often use the phrase that the insurance sector is the Achilles heel of the fossil fuel industry. And that's why we target them, because they hold this enormous power. And we've found that people have really responded to that, and they've resonated with that, especially when politics feels broken, you know, and you're not going to get, maybe it will change after the UK elections, who knows, that are coming up on the 4th of July. But, you know, we knew we weren't going to get traction on the political front, but you could get traction on the corporate front, particularly because, and maybe this is a bit too much detail, but I think insurance, as opposed to the banks, insurance employees see themselves as good corporate citizens because their business model is about managing risk and providing that layer of protection. That's what insurance is supposed to do. Be there, you know, when your house gets flooded, when you're when there's a fire. And there's more and more of emphasis actually on this like deep kind of social injustice of how the insurance companies are raising their premiums and refusing to insure large swathes of, you know, places in Florida, for example, that often comes up, while fueling the fossil fuel crisis, the climate crisis. So we work a lot on that narrative and trying to keep it quite simple and to just repeat it. Like repetition is key. You've got to say it and again and again and again. Without insurance, fossil fuel projects can't go ahead. These people have the power to stop it. And how amazing that they have the power that we don't have. Very similar to what Liat was saying, and you know, and then us being in proximity to these big corporate Goliaths in London, and using that power and privilege to stand in solidarity with groups, for example, in Uganda and Tanzania, where Lloyd's is ensuring the East African crude oil pipeline, who don't, who are also fighting to stop it and to carry huge risks. These people are getting arrested, you know, and harassed in a way that we're not. So we should use that voice. On the kids thing, to be honest, I think we do take a slightly different approach, because it's very much is about mothers stepping up and removing taking like the pressure off the children. That was the starting point. It was like the kids are out on the streets and that's amazing, but they don't need to feel the pressure of dealing with or even understanding all of the complex, you know, the climate crisis. We're going to step up. So we haven't actually thought about that much about how to communicate, you know, the complexities to the kids, but they're obviously part of the actions. You know, and my children know Bruce Carnegie Brown's name, which is hilarious because he's definitely not a household name. But we're really targeting fellow parents rather than trying to explain it to the kids. Although they love it when it's fun, and you know, when we're like sending him a cricket bat in the post or a funny Father's Day card, they can get on board with it without necessarily having to understand all of the connections. I think there was another part to your question, but I can't remember it now.
That was great. Yeah, I think you covered it. Okay, I guess I'm curious too then, how do you go about designing an action? I think you both maybe have slightly different approaches to how you do that, but I'm curious sort of, you know, you've got your target and you're maybe coming up with the hooks and then figuring out what you want to do. Like, what are some of the approaches to really, how do you go about it? What works well and what have you learned? Maybe I'll pass it to, or Liat, you can go ahead.
Sure. I think, you know, similarly to what Maya said, you know, our goal is ultimately the parents. We want the parents to be activists, but I think there is a difference in that one of our tactics for getting parents on board is engaging the kids directly. And like when we design actions, we're thinking about, you know, our goal, the targets, our message, but we're also thinking about the experience of the kids and making sure it's age appropriate and meaningful and, you know, engaging for them, because in our experience, that's part of what helps parents keep coming back. Because you know, and if their kids want to be there, it makes it a lot easier for them. So yeah, and then like also the kids have all gotten to know each other and they're like friends and excited to see each other too, which is helpful. Like if we're designing an action, I think I just need to give a recent example. We went up to Albany, which is the New York state capital, to do an action in support of a state climate bill. And it was like very urgent timing. There's 1 week left in the legislative session. And we wanted, you know, we wanted to do something that's confrontational. We're often balancing actions that are confrontational, but still safe and kid-friendly. So it, you know, we're thinking, okay, what can we do that's like fun, powerful, but still like pushing the boundaries of, you know, one, what families and kids would normally do to get that attention, but also pushing the boundaries of like getting in these lawmakers' faces. And so sometimes we like employ the natural chaos of children for that purpose. so we had kids dressed in firefighter costumes. The whole theme was like, this climate change is a 5 alarm fire. The bill we were advocating for is called New York Heat. So there was like a heat fire thing. And we went outside the doors to the big legislative chamber. And we, the kids are in their fire hats and stuff. And we basically unfurled some giant banners and like giant fabric flames. And then started singing songs, and the kids also had horns that they were blowing. So it's sort of just like unleashing chaos outside the chamber. And our plan, we knew we were going to get kicked out, but we were just like, we're going to hold the space for as long as we can, which was really just a few minutes because the reaction was so immediate. But and then we kind of like moved to the designated protest area once they kicked us out, and continued the action, and ended up, talking to several assembly members where the kids were talking to them and we're singing songs and things like that. And then, we also, in terms of kid-friendly actions, like there's a lot of just like logistics we do to make it work. And it's like length of the action is super important. Like we all know kids just have an inner time limit to doing any one activity. So our actions are usually like 1 to 2 hours. And we often either will do before or after like pizza and playtime. So we'll go to a nearby playground after an action, kind of like debrief, and then the kids can run around and have pizza and have fun. We always bring snacks, like we're just always overflowing with snacks, and just like props and things that the kids can play with, so it's fun and exciting for them. Yeah, so and it's definitely a model that has worked. We're always like worried that some of these kids, like their main organizers' kids, have just been to I don't know, 100 climate protests of like all different varieties, but they still are super engaged. And recently we actually did a kids press conference outside Citibank where we had like a little cardboard podium, and the kids were speaking out, and like it was a range of kids from some like newer members, but then some, like Chandra's son spoke, one of our founding very essential members, and it was just like so powerful to hear them. So they really internalize things, and it becomes an empowering experience for them, which I think is like part of what convinces the parents that this is worth it, because not only are we doing stuff that is focused and strategic, like we're trying to pass a bill, we're trying to get a bank to change their policy, but it's like, you could take your kid to, I don't know, whatever kids do, gymnastics, or you could take your kid to a Climate Families event and they'll have just as much, if not more fun. So I think that's a big selling point for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Maya, what about you?
That's amazing, Liat. I love those examples. I think you guys are really the gurus on how to involve kids. So for us, I think, yeah, a bit different. And I don't know if it's worth showing the photos because it might bring it to life more, but we work a lot with culture and using cultural references to tell a story. Because we know that again can like connect with a much wider audience, and also has been, in our experience, quite effective in getting media coverage. So I can give a couple of examples. So the photos you see at the top are 2 actions that have involved professional dancers and one of the world's leading opera choreographers who's worked with us pro bono. And these are 2 different events, both outside Lloyd's. The one with the kites, that was inspired by Mary Poppins. So there's a scene in the film Mary Poppins where the protagonist, I can't remember his name now, but anyway, he's a banker and he's like a slave to his desk, and he's always at his desk. And then his kid comes along and he's like, "Come on, daddy, let's go and fly a kite." So we took the words from the lyrics from the song, "Let's go fly a kite." I'm not going to sing it. I'm a terrible singer. We subverted those lyrics. So it was all about insurance. And there you had Bruce, like the CEO in the chair, dancing it started off like it was a flash mob. Anyway, it's easier to watch the movie, but that was inspired by the Mary Poppins scene and told the story of how the two bosses at Lloyd's realized that they should no longer like be a slave to the fossil fuel industry and go and fly a kite. It was like a 3-minute flash mob, and it went viral on social media. Kind of took us by surprise, and it just really struck a chord, and it was so beautiful and so joyful, and children were there, but really it was about the show. And just to like give you the backstory, these dancers rehearsed for a day on the Sunday at my kids' school and then performed it the next day on Monday morning. It was quite incredible. They did it, like got the whole routine down in a few hours. And then we did a similar thing back in February, where we told, again, we had dancers, and this time it was set to classical music. There's a very famous symphony called New Symphony, and the theme is all about creating a new world. And these dancers told the story of the corporate employees at Lloyd's who were completely oblivious to big oil menacing the children. And our incredible prop maker made these huge oil derricks, and they were on stilts. And it told the story of how the corporate employees joined forces with the mothers to protect this child who's in the handcrafted globe from the oil industry. And again, the kids were there watching and participating, but the focus was the climate dance. And you never know what will work, but this really seemed to struck a chord. And I think it got something like 60 media hits globally, including page 2 of the Financial Times, which is the paper they all read, the Daily Telegraph, Guardian. So it was like, from a media point of view, it was really, really effective. And I think that's also because we were part of this global week of action being organized by the Sunrise Project. So that has really been something we've lent into, using culture, but those actions are huge lifts. They take so much out of us. So we can only really do like one of those a year max. So we have other events that are kind of smaller, where we're outside the building. We've sang subverted nursery rhymes, flyering. We've had kids making like painting on pipelines outside Lloyd's. And then we've also thought of ways of how to engage, parents outside of street actions. So one thing we did, and you can see the cake here, is we ran something. It was a spin-off on a show in the UK that's really popular. It's a baking show. It's called the Great British Bake Off. I don't know if you have like a Canadian version of that. So we were encouraging parents to bake renewable energy cakes. This was a specific Halloween cake for Lloyd's. And then 3 of the mums ended up on this TV show with their renewable energy cake. It's a show watched by like a lot of people in the UK. I think about 2 million people. So that's the route we've gone down, but it is hard to sustain that kind of level of like creative action, and like what's the next one going to be. I think the other thing just to say in terms of kids and involving kids, that's been a real dilemma for us, is that in order to interact with Lloyd's employees, you need to be outside the building during the working week when school age kids are obviously at school. And for us, most of our kids have grown up, right? So, in the past, my youngest, she was there whether she liked it or not, but now she's at school. So that's a bit of a dilemma of like, you have to find parents with preschoolers. And then how there's like an evolution really in the actions as your children grow up. So that's something that we're kind of constantly wrestling with. The action we're doing next week, for example, where we're handing over this oversized Father's Day card, Superman is delivering the card to the Lloyd's CEO, urging him to be a superhero. We'll have little superheroes, kind of 2-3-year-olds dressed up. Yeah, I'll stop. I could go on for very long about all of it, so I'll stop now.
Amazing. Yeah, both such successful approaches. I was going to ask, does anyone, I saw it in the chat, how has I guess I'm curious about the response from your actions from media, what you found has worked well, and also from decision makers, whether it has prompted the kind of engagement you're hoping for.
You want to? No. Well, I do want to say I have a fantasy about a climate activist going on the Great British Baking Show and using it as a platform. So I think you should apply. And
Fortunately, I can't bake to save my life. But,
it could be a really good recruitment tactic. Yeah, so sorry about media and decision makers. I think, it really varies by campaign. And what we're doing. We've found, media interest in like the moms and kids doing activism angle. And we've had a few like feature stories on, wow, like these moms and kids are doing climate activism. And there's definitely like, media is different in every country, but that is like a story that sort of the mainstream media is more interested in. And then we've, when we participate in federally focused stuff, that is also like where we can get good media because there's just a lot more attention on the national climate work. Unfortunately, like the state of media in America is a lot of the local news is like, there's just less and less of it. So sometimes for like locally focused actions, it can be a little bit harder in terms of media. And then for the finance work, it's definitely a challenge because I think it's like, there's like a weird gap in terms of who wants to cover it, because this is a very specific answer, but like finance reporters don't really care that much about kids and moms outside Citibank. They're covering like the bank's shareholder resolutions and stuff like that. And then, sort of the more like broad, in New York is like the media capital of the country. So like people covering national news or New York based news, also, it doesn't really fit into their beat. So we have gotten some coverage of particularly really creative actions. People are really interested in like when the kids are at the forefront and taking the lead and speaking out, but it is definitely like always a challenge. In terms of decision makers, we have like a lot of relationships with local electeds and have had a lot of contact. Like that's, it's people want to talk to us because they think we're cute, but then we protest them. So we're able to both have like allies of elected officials who are like on our side, but then also like to engage with electeds who we're maybe targeting a little bit more because of our identities. And then in terms of the finance stuff, I mean, we actually, for a while, we were focused on BlackRock asset manager and had direct contact with Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. We went to his house. We deployed the chaos of children running around on his lawn. And then we went back again and had conversations with his wife. And then on the city front, we, had talked to like the chief of sustainability and stuff like that. And, she definitely follows what we do. And we also know she's like a mom who lives in Brooklyn and she's, a little bit our target demographic, but yeah, it's always, it definitely feels like we're able to get a foot in the door because of the kids, and people see us as non-threatening, and then sort of like our secret weapon, for lack of a better word, is that we are willing to be more confrontational and obviously always in a way that's safe and what we feel is age appropriate when kids are there. But yeah, that's kind of, we deploy that a lot. Yeah, that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great. Maya, do you want to share that?
Sure. And I'm also conscious there's like a whole discussion happening in the chat. So sorry if we can't engage with that. So I mean, media is so hard, and we've had some like great successes and some not, and it's hard to know often like what's going to land, and there isn't like an exact science to it. I wish there was. So we find that like we can maybe, and that's different from what you're describing, Liat, is that we can get insurance press fairly easily. I think it's just like, it is so dull. So anything that's happening, they're like, okay, we'll just throw in a story. And I guess that has some value. With this last action, the climate dance that I mentioned, it was like the first time we were really able to break through into the mainstream media. And I think that was because of the quality of the photos, of the press photos that went in. And we had a brilliant press photographer there who had her own great connections. And once one of the wires picks it up, it's then a bit of a butterfly effect. But that is not something you can necessarily replicate. And it's actually really hard to get media just from a creative action and just from kind of parents and kids, however beautiful, however much of your heart you've poured into it. Because, you know, as we know, the media wants a killer fact, they want a news hook. So that is something we're more mindful of. And I think we've actually lowered our expectations about routinely being able to get media from a creative action. And there's just a lot that goes into it in terms of building relationships with the journalists ahead of actions, in between times, then getting that press photo out quickly, working in collaboration with others, doing joint press releases. We've also in the past done work with influencers, and that is a shortcut always to media. You know, this actress is on board, or this, you know, sports personality. But that was when we were doing more work around government, because I think the finance campaigning can be a bit too niche for influencers. So yeah, ongoing challenge. But it does help so much to get media in terms of turbocharging the campaign and getting the attention of your targets, because ultimately that's where they're going to really feel the reputational risk if, you know, they are in the media. And then in terms of decision makers, for Mothers Rise Up, we've really been quite focused on corporate targets rather than elected officials. I think that is now going to change, hopefully post-election, when I think there'll be more space for a constructive dialogue. It's felt a bit hopeless, really, with the current government. Don't quote me, it's being recorded. But anyway, but our strategy has been about corporate engagement, and we have had meetings with our main target face-to-face on Zoom. Whether, you know, how much influence that has, I think question mark, but we are able to get in the door. And I think what's interesting about the type of strategies we're deploying and Liat's group is that we can have that outsider presence where we're doing a creative action. The employees were all filming it. We saw them filming it from the window. So we're very much on the outside, but we can get in and have a conversation and have a dialogue, and they see us as a more constructive voice, as opposed to, say, Extinction Rebellion that has blockaded the building. And I think that's quite helpful to have people that can straddle both the kind of the insider strategy and the outsider, but our real focus is on the creative action rather than doing lots of meetings inside Lloyd's and going like into the detail of ESG policy. That's not our area of expertise.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Really kind of, yeah, that family-friendly approach, and then using it to get effect. There's a couple questions that are related in the chat, and I thought we could get to them here. So people are wondering about your strategies for recruitment and engaging families who may not usually be engaged with activism, and maybe families coming from marginalized communities, whether that's racialized, indigeneity, disabilities, or poverty. How do you make it work intersectional, I guess? And I'm also curious, I was thinking about that as you know, some of these actions might be intimidating to a first-time attendee. So wondering if you have any strategies around that. Liat, maybe I'll pass it to you.
Yeah. So we have really two primary recruitment tactics that we kind of use, and one is sort of emerging, but it's just through school outreach, school-based outreach. We have a program of school ambassadors. And, you know, especially in terms of thinking about diversity and reaching a wide range of families, you know, we kind of think it's the best approach. New York City public schools are extremely diverse, and we have members from all over, you know, the city. So the idea is, you know, one, it's like a leadership pipeline thing for our members to like take on a role of doing outreach on behalf of climate families, but also it's a way to reach a really wide range of communities. And, you know, in the school outreach, we're not leading with like our, actions outside Citibank. We're leading with the stuff that is kind of more accessible. We have a local Green and Healthy Schools campaign that has brought in a lot of new members. So leading with the things that are like sort of more direct, easier to understand, and also maybe a little less like seem less quote unquote radical. And sort of the idea is like we rope them in and then we funnel them into the more confrontational actions if they want, but also, we have a variety of different ways of plugging in, and like there's definitely plenty of people who like just plug into the Green and Healthy Schools campaign, or they, are plugging in other particular areas. And we want to be like a universe where different people can fit. So yeah, the school outreach is one primary way of this program, where like the ambassadors are sharing events that we're having. They're sharing, resources and stuff with their school community. And then another main recruitment tactic, I mean, aside from like actions, which can be recruitment strategies, is we do regular play dates around the city. We call them climate play dates. And like we kind of pick a different neighborhood each time, a different playground or park or community garden. And it's like a very low key climate event. It's an easy entry. Come to this park, there will be snacks, the kids can run around. There's always an action component, whether it's writing a postcard or, making a big banner for an upcoming march. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. And then that's a big way that we've brought in a variety of different families. And also have like an easy first step for both kids and families to get to know us in person and learn more about what we do.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, a few different types of ladders of engagement and tactics there. That's great. What about you, Maya?
I'm sorry, I was just looking at my phone because I was trying to get numbers, not because I wasn't listening to Liat, but I saw that question. So yeah, so we are the Mothers Rise Up. It's a core group of 7 women from different like backgrounds, races, and across, like there's one person in Northern England, Southern England, and then like 3-4 of us in London. So it's a core group, and that's the group that drives all of this work forward. And it started out as completely volunteer, but we now do have funding. So we have funding to pay people 2 days a week in that core group of 7. And that has what's allowed us to really sustain this work and to develop these creative actions, to do the media outreach. And so we do invest quite a lot into the fundraising strategy as well. And I think that was a journey. Like at the start, people didn't feel comfortable necessarily with like moving from volunteer to a more hybrid, because obviously everyone's doing more than 2 days a week, but that's what we have funding for. But I like don't apologize for that. I think this work should be funded. I think like we're bringing a critical voice, and we have the skills and experience, and it's supporting these women who otherwise wouldn't be able to do the work. And that also speaks to like the intersectional issue. Like if you want diverse people doing the work, people need to be funded to do it. Like not everyone has the ability to volunteer, and there is so much funding out in the climate space, and it's going mainly to like policy think tanks led by, in a much old school way. So we have tried to like fundraise for the team, and that's a lot of what I do. It's not very fun, but it feels like it's quite critical. And that's allowed our prop maker, who's a single mother, to do this work full time rather than other things. So I don't know if that's like a discussion we want to get into. So there's that group of 7 women. And then we have a wider group. And I'm not really sure, like, is volunteers the right word? They are like our champions, our followers. They come to some of the actions, but there's no pressure, I guess, for them to come. And the way we organize our actions is that they're not reliant on other people coming or on volunteers coming. So and that was a change. That was a step change in how we did things, particularly because we're having to do these actions during the working week in order to have the interaction with the corporate employees. It's hard to get people out in the working week. So we are thinking differently about it, and we aren't aiming to create a huge network across the UK. There's other groups that are doing that like much more effectively than we are, like Parents for Future UK. But we are investing more in thinking through how to engage with that wider group of amazing, I think they're predominantly or all women who kind of champion and follow our work. And then coming up with those kind of fun actions that can be done at home, like the spin-off on Bake Off, on engaging people digitally to send like the subverted Father's Day card, or send, you know, contact some of the targets on LinkedIn. So thinking through other ways of engaging. But it feels like, I think Liat, we mentioned this. We discussed this when we met in New York, that you guys are trying to do everything, like the super creative actions and build out the base, and that's a lot. That is a lot, because I think those are two quite different strategies. So we've focused more on the creative street campaigning organized by a smaller core group.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of leads into I don't know if you've seen the follow-up questions on the side there, but sort of like, how do you get people to step up into leadership roles, and how many people are kind of behind some of these actions? And I think you've spoken a little bit to that, Maya, with sort of funding the work of a core group of organizers of designing actions in such a way. I don't know if either of you have more to add about how you support people so they don't burn out and make this sort of sustainable.
I mean, I would say a mix of things. So just in terms of our structure, we have like a steering committee of 10 people, and then we have sort of a concentric circle model. But so then the next layer of leadership, as we call it, like a planning or coordinating team. And that's just anyone who's like taking on some kind of coordinating or leadership role. And then the circle out from that is the school ambassadors, and then everybody else is kind of we have like activists and then our audience. So I like having ways for people to step into leadership is definitely really important to us, and also something we're, you know, always trying to get better at. And in terms of, you know, not burning people out, I think, you know, we try to really consistently have the message of like, we're all parents, we all get it. And you know, like if you need to step back, like, oh, you just had a baby, you know, that's okay. Like, this is a community you can step into, you can plug in and help out. Then if you know, work gets busy, your kid is sick, like, you know, we understand, and you can plug back in when you're ready. And also just to address some of the stuff coming up in the chat, I am involved in organizing kid-friendly ceasefire stuff, and I think a lot of this applies. You know, we're talking about climate here, and we're talking about how to do kid-friendly actions, but I think a lot of these strategies can apply to any tough issue that you want to engage kids and families in. So hoping that's helpful in that regard.
Thanks, Liat. Maya, did you have anything to add on that front?
On the burnout question, I mean, that's like, I wish I had the answer. But it is something we're really mindful of, and I think all of us who've done this work have experienced it, and have had to have time out and have had to have time back in. But we're just trying to think like much more intentionally about regenerative culture, and like allowing people to have that time. And also, you know, it's like it's kind of that hackneyed phrase, but to have more boundaries. At the beginning, we were all doing this work like non-stop. We were always online, we were always on the WhatsApp group, and it just completely consumed us, like in every waking moment. And it felt like we had to do that. Like that was the way you had to organize in order to drive things forward. And I think there's just been a realization that it, you know, about self-care and taking time. I think there's been like some conversation about, you know, like actually having that space to connect with nature, to connect with like the deeper issues and your reasons for doing the work. So we're trying to bring that all in, but I know we don't have the solutions to it all. But it's hard. And I think there's been like a comment about you know, the horrors that are happening in Gaza and beyond Gaza. I used to work as an aid worker, and I spent many years in conflict situations and in refugee camps. And you know, when you see what's happening, it can be hard to really get up in the morning, right? But I think for us, the answer is to try to continue to create like joyful, hopeful, and uplifting spaces, because we feel like that's what nourishes us, and that's what we need to keep doing the work. And that doesn't mean we're not in solidarity with like the suffering that's happening, you know, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in the Congo, but that it's still okay to have joy. And it's okay to, you know, to see the beauty in the world. And I know from all the like places I've been some really dark places, people still want that. Even in like any refugee camp you'll go to, you'll still see people trying to bring joy and bring music. And, you know, music and art is also a form of resistance, as we know. So I think it's about trying to like embrace the beauty and the wonder that is there alongside all of like the darkness and injustice that obviously like we can't that is like a present as well. And I don't know, you have to try and somehow hold the two, and it's hard. It's really hard.
Thanks both for those thoughtful answers. We're slowly running out of time here. I know you'd have thought that it might be interesting to chat briefly about like what are some things that parents could connect on a global scale, since we have 3 different parent groups here together. What are spaces for collaboration? I don't know if you want to quickly speak to that. And we can stay on a little bit longer if people have more questions, but maybe I thought I'd bring that up now while we're all still here.
Yeah, sure. And thank you everyone for all your like thoughtful questions and also challenges. I think it's really important to have that kind of conversation. So there's like maybe a couple of things, and probably everyone's kind of wanting to wrap up as well because we've been going on. So on the global side, like kind of global Our Kids Climate, as I said, we're trying to build out this narrative around the children's health, air pollution, fossil fuels narrative, and also really make the case, and this is something that we're hearing more and more, is like we need to make the case for clean, safe, renewable energy and build that social license, because there's a very pernicious, deliberate narrative coming from the fossil fuel industry and their backers that, you know, the alternative doesn't work yet, or the alternative is just as bad. And it's true, like we can't replace one extractivist model with another. So we have to obviously be really mindful of that. But unless there is that chorus of people saying, we want renewables, and you know what, we want it in our own backyard, and we're prepared to have the wind turbine or the solar panel in our own backyard, like the transition is not going to happen like at pace, and it needs to happen in a fair and a just way. But I think there's a lot more, like what I'm hearing and picking up in kind of global spaces is that there needs to be more emphasis on not what do we want to stop. We know we want to stop and we want to phase out of fossil fuels, but what do we want to start, and what are those solutions, and what do they look like? So there's going to be opportunities to support that and to amplify that, starting with, there's a summit for the future that I don't know if you have heard about. So it's being convened by the UN Secretary General, by Antonio Guterres, in New York in September. Has a very wide agenda to reinvigorate the international system, and to develop, like, it's going to the outcome statement will be a pact for the future. So we're thinking about how we can engage with that. Can we have all the parent voices coming together behind a kind of a show of force and interpreting whatever comes out of that summit as a clear call for a fossil-free future and a just transition? And that's like an arc of work that would go through the summit to COP29 in Baku in Azerbaijan, leading to COP30, which will be in Belém in the Amazon in Brazil in 2025. So November, December next year. And that's going to be a big mobilization moment. So just like watch this space. We're trying to think about how to create this global overarching narrative and have parent groups join in, you know, in a really simple way, like signing onto a letter, sharing things on social media. And the next Our Kids Climate Community call, we have a global call every single the last Tuesday of every month, and you're all so welcome to join. We have participants from all around the world sharing. We sometimes have guest speakers. Last month we had the author of Potential Energy, this big global study that kind of demonstrates the power of the parent voice. Anyway, the next global call at the end of June, 25th of June, will be dedicated to brainstorming around this summit of the future and how we can all come together as a movement. So that's at the global level. On the more kind of triangular, like London or UK, Canada, New York, we have this idea, and I'm just seeding the idea now of doing something really fun for Halloween, because Halloween is just such a great cultural moment to call out the villains, to engage kids, to go outside the big banks. So I don't know if we could do something 3 ways. I'm quite conscious it's a week before the presidential elections in the US, so maybe your mind will be elsewhere. But I don't know if we could all collaborate around a kind of corporate focused, corporate targeted Halloween action, and I think it could be really fun. But that's maybe to be continued.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I feel like Liat, maybe it is a bit close, hey, to the election. But the premise is very exciting, and we should definitely keep the conversation going for sure. I don't know, Liat, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I love the idea of holiday actions, and just want to second that Our Kids Climate is awesome, and like it is really powerful to have parents from all over the world. And like I think in terms of collaboration, like just joining a community and stepping into those spaces is a great first thing to do. And also, I mean, I loved, I think this was a UK thing where there was recently like a solidarity social media actions with the Congo, right? And maybe that was through Our Kids Climate. But I think like it's just seeing like more things like that, where those of us who are like in the places where these financial institutions are based in the global north are able to kind of partner with the communities that are being directly impacted, like at the sites of extraction, and you know, have that explicit connection and also like show solidarity. I think, you know, both is like important as a value, but it's also really strategic because it's making real for all the people we're trying to bring into our campaigns. What is the impact of this? It's not just like numbers, you know, that don't mean anything. It's like people's real lives are being impacted every day. So I personally would be excited to engage in things like that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Liat. We're really running out of time. I want to quickly add our partner Jason to the spotlight mix here to speak a little bit about a version of this kind of potential campaign in Canada. Thanks, Jason, for joining us.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's been great to listen in, and Liat, to finally meet you. We may have been on some calls over the years. I've been with the Sunrise Project for on and off for about 9 years, helping build different campaigns, including BlackRock and insurance and banks in the UK and banks in Canada. And we're kind of in this moment in Canada where all the attention has been on, in so-called Canada, where all the attention has been on RBC. It was a really good supervillain campaign to have, like, one year, rather than talking about banks or the financial system, you personalize it, you villainize it. It did a really good job of villainizing themselves by becoming the world's biggest funder of fossil fuels last year, and their terrible practices at AGMs and their terrible Indigenous rights practices. But anyways, we're at the point where RBC is, everyone kind of knows that RBC is bad and that it's kind of systemic across all banks. All the other 5 banks are like right underneath them on all the worst practices, as well as really low clean energy percentages. We have some intel that BMO, which is the 8th biggest bank in North America now, and the 3rd biggest in Canada, actually wants to be a leader and thinks of themselves as a leader, but their practices, of course, are pretty weak. They've got some things that are a little better. We can get into that in the future. So yeah, we've just been talking to Gabrielle for a while about a spin-off of, kind of the community as a whole, which is pretty big in Canada, shifting focus a little bit less on RBC to go after some of the other targets, including Ottawa regulation, which is ultimately where a lot of these voluntary commitments need to go and be, enforced into law. So we've just been chatting about how to have fun with BMO, who thinks they're leaders, and run basically a positive campaign, a little bit bypassing the political stalemate that we're on around fossil fuels, and not having it be a fossil fuel campaign, but putting more attention and focus on the positive. Could you be a leader? Could you actually really drive renewables innovation? And having it be fun and having it be kids and, yeah, so that's what we've been chatting about. And I think, Gabrielle, you're going to organize something in the future to talk more, because there's definitely some other groups that have been meeting with BMO and really confirmed that they want to be leaders and they're scared of the RBC campaign coming for them. And I was also just really inspired by the Maya, you talking about, picking a CEO and having fun with them and doing like positive and playful. The CEO is like a skier and he's part of the Montreal Canadiens. So there's like some hockey, there's some alpine skiing, there's some, and apparently he's not the worst of the bank CEOs. Apparently he's like a semi-normal human as opposed to some of the other, sociopathic corporate guys. So anyways, all that to say, we'd love to chat more. And I guess so the last thing I wanted to say is, the thinking here is with a lot less effort than we put into RBC, or the 5 years into Lloyd's, or the 10 years into Chase Bank in the US now. We feel like with a lot less effort, because of all the noise in the space, that we can move BMO faster with like some targeted actions, as opposed to having to throw the kitchen sink at them for years and years and years, which is what we did with BlackRock and all these other places. That now we can target something and they'll be scared. It's basically like the threat of that whole kind of system coming after them. So yeah, that's the power of a network, is, you can play a role in it and others are playing a different role, and we can actually move these giants faster. So is that good, Gabrielle? Did I
That
miss
was
anything?
great. No, that was perfect. Thanks, Jason. Maya, do you want to?
No, I just wanted to say that in the UK, we've so appreciated the way the Sunrise Project has worked, and it's like a gift to a small group to have Sunrise come in with the political strategy, with a lot of the information, the contacts, and then bring together the coalition, and then be really respectful of our voice within that. So I think it's a really brilliant model. So just wanted to share that. And then in terms of the sports, that is the way to go. I think if the CEO loves sports, I mean, they were completely open with us and said, you got to him through cricket. And also it's such a great way to engage a wider audience who also loves like that. And my husband will be aghast that I can't remember the name of any Canadian hockey teams. He's Canadian, but anyway, that's such a great way to then connect with your audience, right? Because everyone has a team that they love, everybody gets it. So I think it's a really clever way in and a fun way in, and also great for kids, right? Because kids like will have a sport that they love. So I think there's like a whole other area of work that we tried to lean into, and then we only got so far around like the parent voice, sports, and the target. So that's maybe for next year.
For sure. Yeah. And it's our team organizer, Jennifer, just in the chat, no outdoor hockey in a climate, like hockey is a very potent symbol of climate change as well. So I think that would be great. Yeah, if anyone's interested in that, obviously there's headquarters in Toronto and Montreal. We'd love to talk to you about BMO, and I'll be sending follow-up information around this call. But team organizers in those places, if you're interested, let me know. We'd love to talk about doing something fun around it. I think that's all the time we have. It was so great to chat to you both. Thank you so much for your time and all your amazing insights. It was really inspiring. I really appreciate you joining us today. So yeah, we'll follow up with everyone with the recording of this chat and a bit of a summary around what was covered. And if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to share, and we'll connect you to with we'll put the contact for climate families and Mothers Rise Up as well, and share the Our Kids Climate call so people can join. Do either of you have any last words before we jump off?
Thank you for having me, and appreciation to everyone here doing activism and organizing. glad we're in it together.
Yeah, exactly what Liat said. Thank you so much. And Liat and I keep saying we need to meet and collaborate. So I feel like you've kind of also made this happen.
Yeah, thanks for facilitating this meeting,
Yeah.
Maya. For me.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it is. It's all adding up, and it's easy to get despondent. But like we're seeing parent groups springing up everywhere, and like our global community is strong, and then we can connect it to these really local fights and laser type targeting. So it's all we've got to keep going, right? That's just got to keep going.
For sure. It's so nice to know people are doing it on all fronts all over the world. It's great. Okay. Well, I'm going to let everyone go. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon and evening. Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Wonderful presentations.